Well, welcome everybody who is here. My name's Madeline Slabsky. I'm a field crops educator based in Jackson County, covering some Southeast Michigan counties. And I am happy to be here for today's virtual breakfast. I'll introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Marty Chilvers. We'll be talking wheat disease management.
Good morning, everybody. So my name's Martin Chilvers. Please, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat so we can get to those. So we're going to just chat about wheat and small grain diseases. Just a quick shout out and thank you to funding from the Michigan Wheat Program and other sources, including federal sources that are really important for this work. All right, so Dennis was out and about the state earlier this season and shared with me some photos and some samples of snow mold. So we saw quite a bit of this across the state. And I think what led to that is those relatively warm conditions and then heavy snowfall on top of that. And so that just creates this condition, little chamber, if you will, for moisture and whatnot, for those snow mold diseases to take off. It seems like it's fairly sporadic in Michigan. So we really don't have a good handle on variety resistance, but that's one of the primary ways to manage it. Out west, they deal with this a lot, and they do a lot of variety resistance to help manage this disease out there. I definitely want to try and avoid a lot of leaves going into fall that might potentially exacerbate that, so heavy nitrogen loads. Seed treatments might help, and we're doing some work at the moment actually, and we've pulled from seedlings, we've pulled some of these snow mold species out, and so we're looking at how these fungicides, whether they work or not under lab conditions. And a fungicide in fall sometimes is used in some areas of the country, but it's very hit and miss as to whether you're going to put it on at the right time and then get conditions where we see snow mold anyway. So it's a little bit of a challenge to manage and fairly sporadic. The other thing that's popped up, Dennis said out west side, and I believe Nicole was finding this down south as well. There's some pretty heavy powdery mildew. This is favored by sort of mild winters, cool, humid conditions, and lack of rainfall. Excess nitrogen as well will help push this along. Again, variety, when we're talking about management of any disease, variety selection is a really important piece. So variety is a component of that. So if you've got something that's very susceptible, you may have more powdery mildew compared to planting something with better resistance. And then fungicides can be used to help manage powdery mildew. There is some fungicide resistance reported in the country. That's something we're going to try and take a look at. I think primarily Strobilurin, but anyway, that's something that we'll dig into here on the research front. People are still pretty concerned about stripe rust, given what we experienced last year. So we had a pretty major epidemic. So this is favored by cool and wet conditions. As far as we know, for the most part, that inoculum moves up from down south. My colleagues in Wisconsin actually flagged out some fall infected wheat, so some newly planted wheat in the fall of last year that developed some stripe rust. They put some flags out. They've gone back to that this spring, and they haven't been able to find any active pustules. So it looks like just during the winter it's died off. So generally, what we're thinking about is movement from down south. So just to sort of, if you didn't experience this somehow, if you missed out on it or weren't aware, this is what we were seeing last year. So this is in Kurt Steinke's fertility trials. And just by the way, Kurt saw no effect of fertility in his particular trials. There's possibility that high nitrogen could drive this, but he didn't see any effect in his particular trials. It's very patchy as well. It can be very patchy across a field. Anyway, he had very high levels develop May 17th, and about a half a mile away in our trial that we planted very late in the fall of 23. We had a very bad stand. We thought we'd have to disc it up, but we got enough there to do trials in. It was clean, and here's a picture of our wheat up on the right-hand side here. So what I did is irrigated that wheat, and we collected a bunch of leaves from Kurt's plots made a spore suspension here, and here's a microscope photograph of those orange Iridinia spores of that stripe rust. And then I sprayed that onto some fungicide trials just to see how these different fungicides would be performing for a stripe rust management. So here's a photo that's taken 18 days after inoculation. And you can see the stark contrast on the left-hand side here where we're not inoculated, green, healthy looking plots, very little stripe rust. Sure, there might be a little bit that sort of, moved in naturally by now. But where we've inoculated, where I went through and sprayed that spore suspension, all of those plants are very much lit up, and there's a lot of damage to those flag leaves. So it just shows you in 18 days, just over 2 weeks, how quickly that can build. And that's one of the reasons why it catches us off guard if we're not out paying attention. And it is developing. It can move very, very quickly. So here's some fungicide efficacy data. And you don't have to digest this. We provide this in a nice table format that you can look at. That's much easier to sort of look at and understand how these different products are working. But essentially, that table is informed by these trials that we do. And this is just one example. So what you're looking at here is a non-treated check on the very bottom of this graphic. I've got yield shown in blue, and I've stacked all the treatments by yield, and then the amount of stripe rust in red there. So you can see that non-treated check, we're about 10 bushels lower than any of those fungicide applications, and obviously much more severe stripe rust. About 70% of that leaf area are consumed with stripe rust at the date of this rating. So most of these applications, except for the very top one, were applied at Feeks 8. And then we made that spore application, that inoculation, 1 week later, okay? And we'll get back to timing in a second, but timing is very, very important. Essentially, to me, it demonstrated that most of these foliar products did a pretty good job at suppressing stripe rust. That application of Presaro at 10.5.1, which is just 7 days after I made that application of stripe rust, did the best. That timing again is really critical. You don't want to be too early. You don't want to be too late. Let's get into that in a second here. What we'd seen back in 2016, so the last time we'd seen a stripe rust epidemic was a bad one was 2016. And here's another example of a plot. This is all naturally infested. So left-hand side here, non-treated check. Right-hand side where we had sprayed at that T2 or flag leaf Feeks 9 timing. So I think last year as well, we had to be out there at flag leaf to really get good protection. We couldn't really wait until flowering. This year, we're not seeing any stripe rust yet, so I don't think that flag leaf application is critical for stripe rust management this year. We'll definitely be waiting and watching. And here's a map of how we are waiting and watching. So at the moment, I just checked this morning, there's a couple more counties now in Kansas that have confirmations of stripe rust, but it's pretty minimal. Compared to this time last year, we had a lot more counties in Kansas that were lit up, and similarly in Oklahoma. There's this one random one up in Minnesota, and I haven't gotten to the bottom of that yet. That might be because of the cereal disease lab in St. Paul. I'm not too sure, but anyway. At the moment, no cereal rust detected in Michigan to date. I went back and checked. The Michigan wheat crew found it on May 9th for 2024. So we're about the same time, right? It's May 8th today. But because we're not seeing it blowing up down south, I don't think it's going to be an issue this year. Just a note, they are in the south, in Kentucky and Kansas, they are seeing fairly significant leaf rust. I don't feel that this is anywhere near as aggressive as stripe rust, but just interesting to note. I think for the most part, we should be good to wait until those flowering applications to get good control of these rusts if they start to move up across the country. But again, you've got to be out and scouting. And if we see anything change, we'll get the word out to the best of our ability to make you aware. All right. So Let's talk about wheat streak mosaic virus, and I've put this in to segue with stripe rust because understandably a lot of people are seeing this out in their fields and getting freaked out that they have stripe rust. But this is not stripe rust, it's wheat streak mosaic virus. So this is some photos Dennis collected samples earlier this week. And yeah, I mean, just from a photo, if you send me a photo, it's a little bit blurry, but I can't blow up. I might be concerned about, the potential for stripe rust. Sometimes the resistance reaction can, in that wheat variety to stripe rust, you might not see typical sporulation. So if you're unsure, and I appreciate those that have gotten samples into us when they're not sure, just to double check, see what's going on. Anyway, it seems that we are seeing a little bit more wheat streak mosaic virus this year. Dennis was up in Huron County and saw quite a bit in performance trials up that way. Keeley, a graduate student with me in my program, has been around Hillsdale, Lenawee, and Monroe County, and has found wheat streak mosaic virus in all of the fields she's looked at. And pretty much all of the samples bar two. I think she's looked at 30 or 40 samples, and there's only a couple where she hasn't found it in. So it was in every single field that she sampled. Wheat streak mosaic virus is spread by the wheat leaf curl mite. There's really nothing we can do in terms of spraying for wheat leaf curl mite. The important thing that we can do, though, is destroy volunteer wheat. So this is a picture from up in the thumb from last year. We've got some volunteer wheat that's just being killed off. This is in June. And then we've got our wheat right across the laneway, and it's loaded with wheat streak mosaic virus. So those wheat leaf curl mites have, from that wheat streak mosaic virus in that volunteer wheat, they've carried that virus load in their bodies through to the neighboring wheat next door and resulted in issues. So I think that's the big message here. Control volunteer wheat, especially at planting in the fall. We don't want to be planting next to a volunteer wheat field. Let's chat really quickly about head scab. Of course, this is the same pathogen that also causes gibberella ear rot in corn. It's favored by warm, wet weather with high relative humidity, and that's one of the parameters that really drives the predictive models that we have. Of course, variety susceptibility, as with all diseases, is a critical component to disease development. So here's a grab of the Fusarium risk tool that I pulled yesterday. We're still very early. Of course, we're not flowering yet, so it's early days. Get back and check this, and I'll check this and provide updates at additional virtual breakfasts. But at the moment, we're showing very low risk in Michigan. There's high risk in Kentucky, lower Illinois, Indiana at this point in time. So we're just looking at that color. When we're in the red zone, that's we're at very high risk, and I would be very concerned if we were flowering in Michigan, and would definitely be wanting to make sure we had a fungicide application. So just briefly then, in terms of head scab timing, it's really critical for those fungicides to go on at flowering. And we want to try and target as many flowers as possible in the field. We know from the beginning of flowering, so when we hit 10-5-1, so that's when 50% of the heads are flowering in a field, we have about a 7-day window to make that fungicide application. You go beyond that, you're really going to start to lose efficacy. You might see something, but it's going to start to drop off. And prior to flowering too, maybe you'll get something, but it's really not the best use of your dollars. Much better to get it out there during flowering to have the best chance of really doing a good job at suppressing head scab. So we've got a number of products. Again, this will be in the fungicide efficacy chart. Madeline will put a link up to that in a minute. We essentially have seen very good performance from these newer products. So Prosaro and Carumba are a couple of our older products now. Miravis Ace and Spherex perform equally as well. And there's a new version of Prosaro called Prosaro Pro. I don't have data on this particular slide, but it's also performing just as well. And just a quick note on use of fungicides as well. Think about them as suppressing disease, not eliminating. They're not magic bullets. They're not going to eliminate disease, right? So in this graphic on the left-hand side, we're showing how we can reduce the amount of head scab, not eliminate it. And the same with the amount of DON. We can reduce it by about 40 to 60%, but not eliminate the amount of vomitoxin. Really good coverage is critical. So flat fans are fine for foliar diseases where we're just trying to get coverage of leaves. But when we're trying to get coverage of the heads, we want to try and do the best job we can at covering both sides of that head as we're driving through the wheat field. So there's various approaches to this. You can have forward and backward nozzles, twin jet nozzles, anything to help get better coverage. And we need to factor in driving speed and whatnot as well. But important things to consider. So again, head scab management, resistant variety is really important. If you don't know what you've got out there, just check your variety ratings so you know if you have a susceptible variety or not. Really important. Fungicide, from beginning of flowering. We see optimal control probably about 4 days post-flowering. And maybe that's because we're starting to pick up some of those tiller heads. Managing for uniformity if we can within a field so we can get best fungicide timing on that wheat across the field. And here's just a photo of that fungicide efficacy chart. So it's going to have all those various fungicides that are labeled for wheat, and then how we rank those based on their performance for stripe rust or head scab and these other diseases, powdery mildew and septoria. So that's a great resource, and we look at that every year and update it every year. So please, take a look at that. And that's what I have this morning. Thanks very much for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
All right, so we have quite a few questions, and Marty has been answering most all of them in the chat. So if you're able to and curious, you can scroll through those written responses, but I think we'll just kind of start reading them. Is that okay, Marty?
Yeah, I can go through and just start answering if you like.
Yeah, that works. We can maybe start with powdery mildew.
Oops, I have my video off. Sure thing. So let's go back up to the. I got it. I'm on it. So powdery mildew, showing at this time, is it wise to apply a fungicide or is it not cost effective? Well, the big thing, and when anyone asks me, whether it's tar spot or whatever in the crop, we've got to think about where we are in terms of the growth stage. Are we going to make a fungicide application anyway in a couple of weeks? Will we not planning? What's the upcoming weather? All these factors, right? How susceptible the variety is, because that's what affects the ROI. And because of that, it's very hard for me to give you a yes or no answer because it depends on all these specific factors in your fields, right? So, okay, with that being said, certainly if powdery mildew is blowing up, what the idea there is to stop it from moving up onto the flag leaf, moving up into the canopy. If it's doing that, without a doubt, it's going to impact yield. So we want to be monitoring for powdery mildew. If we weren't planning on a fungicide, but we realize that, we do have a susceptible variety and the conditions just keep favoring it. Jeff said it's going to be dry. Warm, it's not going to love that, but the dry is good for powdery mildew. It doesn't really like the rain, so it just likes higher humidity. So anyway, there's potential for that to certainly continue climbing up on the canopy. So it could certainly be valuable to put a fungicide on. If you're thinking about a flag leaf and you're not quite there yet, maybe pull the trigger now and get that on to help suppress that powdery mildew until you maybe going to come back anyway with a head scab application towards the end of the month. So something to think about. The next one is Bill had a question about barley timing for head scab. So essentially in barley, we want to wait until 10-5-1. So once that head is fully emerged, we want to wait about 4 to 6 days post that full head emergence. That's sort of our optimal window. And we actually have data showing about 8 to 10 days here in Michigan post that head emergence. So don't pull the trigger too early, just as the head's starting to emerge. That's probably too early in barley. We're not going to see the best performance. Wait until we're about 4 days post head emergence. through to about maybe 10 days. And then after that, I think the efficacy, just like it will in wheat, will start to drop off. So that's probably your optimal timing, about 6 days post full head emergence in barley. What is the ROI, bacterial powdery mildew for moderately susceptible resistant variety and fungicide for powdery mildew? Well, yeah, I mean, if you've got a very resistant variety, you have a little bit of powdery mildew, but the resistance is keeping it in check, the ROI is going to be pretty minimal. If you've got a susceptible variety and it's going to blow up, yeah, then your ROI increases dramatically. I'd urge you all to really consider, where possible, leaving check strips. This is important across all your crops for fungicide applications. You're investing a lot of money. I think it's really important for you guys to know how much ROI you're getting from these applications. So I'd really encourage you to think about trying to leave just enough area at least to run through the combine and get an idea of how these products are performing for you. And of course, every year is a little bit different. So I would do it every year if possible. I think it's really important. Every year is, just so different in terms of disease dynamics.
Marty, kind of on that, the
Yeah.
question about the ROI of all three timings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Yep. So actually, Kurt Steinke and I set out to do some studies. So we must have run it from 21 through 2023. So we ran trials here on campus and I believe up at Saginaw Valley as well, where we tried those three timings and we got no disease. So we had very low ROI on those three timings, right? Again, a
And the three
single.
timings were, can you just go over?
Yeah. Sorry. So what we're talking about there is, we sort of talk about these blanket three timings. So those early applications, those Feeks 5, maybe 6, that maybe you're thinking about, we're going across the field anyway with a herbicide, we're still going to spike in the fungicide. From that alone, we typically see around about a 4 bushel ROI from just that application. From flag leaf, we see generally about a 7 bushel compared to the non-treated check. The combination of that early, and then I should pull the slide up
Yeah, we're
here.
really making bring this back.
Yeah, and so let me just show you the slides real quick.
Mhm.
Alrighty.
And that 4 bushel for that early timing, that's coming from control of powdery mildew, stripe rust, those kinds of not
Yes. Yep. Good point, Madeline. So here's the data. So looking at that very early application, we sort of asked the question. I'm hearing from a lot of people, we're putting it in the tank as we're going across the field with herbicide. I'm like, well, does that really make sense? So we ran the numbers. This included data from Martin Nagelkirk up in the thumb, Kurt, myself. Yeah, and on average, we saw a full 4 bushel response from that early application alone, just that early application. Looking at flag leaf alone, just less than 7 bushel. That head scab timing at about 7.5 bushel from that single application, just as that. When we start looking at combinations of early and that head scab timing, it just seems like that 4 and 7 bushel are pretty much adding together, around about 11 bushel, maybe a little bit under that. So I think what we're going to see is, if we look at all three, we're not going to see any additional gains beyond that, that early at T1 and that application at flowering. Kurt and I ran the trials and we just didn't get any real response because we had very, very low disease years. So the data I have up on the screen is, across, I think, 10 years of data. So that's pulling in years where we do have pressure, when we don't have pressure. So it's just the average response, right? And again, that's why I urge you all to try and run check strips where possible to really understand, what is happening on your farm with your varieties, what type of responses are you getting. Really important in these tight markets. So, all right, what other questions did we have?
we want to keep on powdery mildew.
Sure.
Just talking about, so Julius asked, what's the ROI like for moderately susceptible or
Right.
resistant varieties?
Right. So Yeah, Julius. So, I mean, again, if that resistance is really good, we see a little bit of disease, but the resistance is keeping it in check. Yeah, then from the powdery mildew alone, ROI is going to be pretty minimal, right? But if we've got a susceptible variety and it's moving up onto the flag leaf, absolutely you're going to see some ROI from that. I think Dennis has a comment as well, so jump in, Dennis.
Yeah, I was just going to say I was at the Allegan State Yield Trial yesterday, and I rated the varieties for powdery mildew. And this resistance is a real thing because right next to each other, two plots, one was completely covered with powdery mildew to where when you put your hand in there and pull back or open up the crop canopy, you can see like a puff of powder from it. And then the plot right next to it, there was virtually none. You couldn't find any. So it's very important for variety selection and knowing what you have, whether you're going to get any ROI or not.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dennis. And I think, yeah, that's a really good demonstration from, this year out in the field. Like that variety piece is so important. So I think we've got to pay attention to that. It seems like powdery mildew, at least within my sort of extension network across the country, seems to be being a little bit more severe lately. And maybe it's because, we haven't paid as much attention when we've been screening varieties. So yeah, I can't stress that enough, that looking at varieties is really, really important.
So maybe head scab now. I think we covered all of
Yeah,
the powdery mildew.
yeah.
So timing for barley from Bill for
Yes,
head scab.
Bill. So timing there, we want to try and hit about 4 to 6 days um, post head emergence in barley. I have a slide here. So this slide here, what we're looking at is, full head emergence is 10.5. And so we want to be about 4 to 6 days post that. So here's some data from our trials here, looking at the amount of DON at 4 to 6 or 8 to 10 days post that head emergence in barley. We see a reduction about half or thereabouts in DON levels as opposed to earlier applications. So yeah, the timing there, make sure you're about 4 to 8 days post head emergence for barley.
So I like this question from David asking, wind's a big problem during the day. What do we lose if we are spraying earlier in the morning or later at night? What's the risk of having dew on the head where we're trying to
Yeah,
target?
yeah. Well, sometimes we get the question too after a rain. Someone calls me and like, "Hey, we just finished spraying and it's pouring down." I'm like, "Well, nothing we can do about that, right? Unfortunately, we've lost that fungicide." So, I think most products, require about a 2-hour rainfast window. So, I guess we've just got to think about the amount of dew that we have. Like you said, David, if the heads are up above the canopy and don't really have any dew on them, there's probably little risk there in terms of getting good, product on there and it not running off. As long as it's not too heavy in the foliage, it probably should be okay. If you're using the fine to moderate droplet size in your sprayer, they're going to dry out relatively quickly. Yeah. Someone have a comment? Someone going to say something? Maybe not. But
Nope.
yeah, I think we just, the heavier the dew, then maybe more of an issue it's going to give you. But we'd prefer it to dry off if possible.
All right. From Julius, it appears the DMIs or triazoles reduced on contamination better than the SDHIs.
Right. So we can't really do a one-to-one comparison because there's not really any single mode of action SDHI products out there that we can put out and just see how they compare to DMIs. I think if we could do that, I think they probably provide similar performance, but I'd be speculating. We'd have to do the test. In the lab, we certainly see the SDHIs can do a good job at suppressing growth of fusarium. But with fungicides, it's not just a matter of how well they perform in the lab, it's how they perform in the field. their uptake distribution in the plant, how long they're active for, all those things. But in general, basically all those new products, whether they have SDHI or not, they seem to do a pretty good job at, or very similar job at suppressing head scab and mycotoxins.
And do you want to reiterate your note about exacerbating
Oh,
vomitoxin?
yeah, thank you, Madeline. So I just put that in there, and we're doing a trial this year, and we're just going to use headline, not headline amp, just headline alone. So just strobilurin, and we're going to spray that when you shouldn't be. So we're going to spray it during flowering just to see if we can develop our own data set. So last year just got me a little bit worried with stripe rust. We've got to just be a little bit careful about, it's off-label to be making fungicide applications that include a strobilurin during heading and flowering. And with stripe rust, I know people were really worried, and we might have been, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, I just want to double check things and provide that data set back to you all, because certainly if there's a strobilurin single product that we spray that can exacerbate the amount of mycotoxin. With a combined product, whether you've got a DMI and a strobi, maybe that's not the case, but again, that's off-label, and so we just want to be very aware of that as we're making fungicide applications and thinking about the growth stage of our crop.
Okay, good stuff. I think just one more question about oats and cereal rye and looking
Yeah,
for similar diseases.
yeah, Mark, that's a good question, and Phil was asking me as well. So again, disease management, varieties. So make sure you understand the varieties you're growing. If they're susceptible to crown rust, you want to be aware of that. With oats, we tend to see a lot of crown rust come in. If you've experienced heavy foliar disease in your oats in the past, I would certainly think about maybe making that fungicide application. We don't have as much trial data just because we don't get as many trials to run on oats. But certainly, again, if the variety is susceptible, we have disease moving in, they could definitely benefit from that application. And it depends on the end use as well. If it's for grain for feed, we probably certainly want to minimize mycotoxin concentration. So absolutely a fungicide at flowering could be very helpful for oats grown for grain.
Good, thanks, Marty.
Yeah.
I think you're off the hook now.
All righty. Thanks.
We do have some comments from some other specialists. Lyndon, oh, well, Dennis, you could go ahead and probably give an update since we're talking wheat.
Yeah, sorry about that. The only thing I wanted to mention is we do have 3 regional field days in addition to our main wheat field day coming up. We will have field days at our Allegan, Central Michigan, and Huron State Yield Trial locations. They will be May 20th, 21st, and 22nd. You'll be able to see some of these differences in the varieties if you come to those. There is a MSUE news article that has the details on the information as far as where the fields are located and whatnot. So if we could find that and post
Yeah, I
that.
can send that.
So
Oh,
everyone's
Marty's got
welcome
it.
and invited to those. There's no registration required. And then the main wheat field day will be held in conjunction with the wheat tour on June 25th. So.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, the link for Marty put the link for the regional wheat field days. We'll see if we can get the wheat day up there as well. Hey, Jeff, do you want to address the last frost?
Yes, and I was able to respond, but the question was, is tomorrow the last frost? And of course, again, we talked about lying meteorologists. It's never say never, but given the outlook that we have, one would have to expect a lower than normal risk of frost and freezing temperatures as we especially move into next week. But that said, we have frost and freezing temperature risk. We know climatologically here, well, for the remainder of May, certainly Memorial Day, and even into early June, especially interior northern areas of the state. So just have to keep that in mind. But given the outlook, I would think for many parts of the state, yes, in reality was tomorrow morning. If we do see frost, that may be the last of the season. That's at least what the guidance was suggest now.
Hey, we heard it. You made the call, no more frost. Now Lyndon put a message in about first need for irrigation this season. Lyndon, do you want to add
Yep.
anything to that?
Just bring to attention that the last 2 weeks, many areas of the state just barely met the water needs as far as rainfall. So we don't have a lot of accumulated capacity. And next week may be the time that if you're raising grain for or small grains for wheat or forage, next week may be the week to turn the systems on. There's a good article from Dennis Pennington on that topic of raising irrigated small grains.
Thanks, Lyndon. How about alfalfa weevil? Chris, any comments?
There's alfalfa weevils. What else to say? It's the right time of the year to check your stands for weevil. We always default to cutting if you can, rather than spraying because there's lots of parasitoids out there. Dennis has found some aphids in wheat, and those are moving typically south to north on Jeff's wind currents from various storms and such. The GLIPM website, the Great Lakes Maritimes Pest Monitoring Network, has traps in there already. There's black cutworm catches. Something about Wisconsin. There's a lot of black cutworm catches in Wisconsin, but they also run traps very religiously, and dozens of them. So we only have a few traps reporting right now, like maybe 6. They might have 66, so they have a lot. And nothing, I didn't see anything in the true armyworm yet, although that has been found. Unfortunately, the Purdue Trapping Network, which has been very reliable to the south of us, is not reporting yet this year. Their entomologist has retired. And so I always relied on them to give me a little early warning, and we don't have it this year. So that GLIPM site is valuable to go to see kind of what's flying. That's about it.
So
Oh,
Chris,
and one more thing to add about this wheat curl mite that Marty talked about. It has alternate hosts itself. It can feed on corn and some other kind of grassy weeds. So when Marty's talking about getting rid of volunteer wheat, that doesn't necessarily diminish the wheat curl mites, but it does take out the disease reservoir. So that green bridge is important, and fly-free date also comes into play for planting again, that you would deny this pest a way to get rid of that bridge so it doesn't infest your wheat in the fall. So fly-free date is pretty important for this, but getting rid of the volunteers is key for the disease management. Sorry, I heard Phil talking there.
That's all right, Chris. That was a good point. Just a question about predicting alfalfa weevil. Is there anything that you know of that we can use as a predictive tool for weevil infestations?
I would just rather have people walk stands and see what's there.
Okay.
Because on campus, when I've walked stands, sometimes I'm really surprised by the distribution of small to large. Like it doesn't seem like that it often has just like a cohort and they're all the same size. So I think it would be better to walk stands to find out what you have and go with a net. A sweep net is really important here.
Thanks, Chris. There's one more comment from our soybean educator, Eric Anderson, says, soybean emergence is beginning.
Nope, just to keep that
Okay.
in mind for planting. I know some guys have the soils have been wet, and so they've just been able to get planted and then planning to do their residual herbicide following planting. So I just had a couple of comments posted in there about that.
All right. Well, we are at 8 o'clock now. I don't see any further comments or questions. So I think we are good to close it up. Thank you to all the specialists who joined and gave extra comments. And thank you, Marty, for another great and timely presentation.
Thanks for having me.